Hello, global gardeners. It's Monday. That means it's gardening chat time. Great to have you all here today. Let's focus on seed starting. Many of us have already started our seeds or are getting ready to start our seeds. So I'm hoping we can share lots of tips today in setting up the space that you're going to use to start your seeds. All of us do it a little bit differently, but of course there are some important aspects to it, and that's what we'll be talking about today. Let's go ahead and talk about the question that Gilles has today. Gardener Scott, online there are videos of people making seed tape with toilet paper and 2 carrot seeds in a drop of flour water paste at spaced intervals. Is it going to start germination? Great question. And I'm surprised that you didn't see my video. About 4 years ago, I did a video on how to make seed tape, and my granddaughters and I had a wonderful time, and you can see that in the video. I use strips of newspaper rather than toilet paper. You can also use paper towels. The idea is just a light paper that will break down and isn't so thick that the seed can't grow through it. But it will only grow through it when you are giving it regular water. And Jay pointed this out. Carrot seeds are slow to germinate and they require a steady state of moisture. The paste should just be a drop, and then you put the seeds in it. I usually only put 1 carrot seed at the spaced intervals. And that paste, if it's not too watery, will be drying out in a matter of just a couple minutes. And those couple minutes of moisture are not enough to start the germination of the carrot seed and all other kinds of seeds. You can make seed tape using just about anything. As I talk about in the video, I think it's a great way to get that spaced interval. So for radishes and carrots and other plants that you want to have a very specific spacing but is relatively close together, seed tape actually works out pretty well. And germination isn't a problem. A little bit of paste on whatever kind of paper you choose, a seed, let it dry, and then put it into your seed storage bin until it's time to actually put it outside. So it is a fun project for kids. It's one of those things that if you're looking for a kid's gardening activity, making seed tape can actually be a lot of fun. And it actually works. It's a great way to put seeds into the garden with that very specific spacing. So thanks for asking that question. Oh, there's Jay right on top of things. There's the link to my video on how to make seed tape. Very easy to do. So, and don't worry at all about the germination aspects of it. So nice to see everybody. Gardens Happen says, I got my first taste of homegrown radishes. Never grew radishes before. These were pink beauties from Baker's Creek. So congratulations to you. That's always nice. A little early for a lot of the rest of us to be starting, but I'm glad that you're able to do it. Jackie Jacks is asking, what's your favorite thing to grow? And by all means, all the rest of you can throw in the comments what your favorite thing to grow is. And so when I think of my favorite things to grow, and I'm actually got this laid out for a video that I think will be coming out in a couple months, I look at different categories of what I like to grow as a favorite. So one of my favorite things to grow is raspberries, just because I like being out in the garden and picking a fresh raspberry as soon as it's ripe. It's just a wonderful experience in my mind. And so that's one of my favorite plants to grow for that reason. Tomatoes, particularly the really sweet cherry tomatoes, also fall into that category of it's delicious in the garden, and that's what makes it one of my favorite things to grow. But there are also flowers that fall into that category. I'll grow flowers that remind me of my grandmother, for instance, that she grew in her garden, violas on the ground in my front. And so that's one of my favorite plants to grow, because when I see those violas growing through, and I think she called them Johnny Jump Ups, it just refreshes that memory I have of my grandmother. And so I have a whole bunch of favorite things to grow, which you think there should only be one favorite. But when you place them into the different categories, you can have a favorite plant in a number of different categories. And so I love making pickles. Pickling cucumbers is one of my favorite plants to grow for the purpose of making the cucumber pickles. So there's a few that I always try to have growing in my garden, and I'll be interested to see what the rest of you have to say about what some of your favorite plants are, because it is one of those things that my favorite doesn't have to be the same as your favorite, but we can enjoy the same kind of experiences in the garden. So I just love that. Llama, my garlic is starting to pop up. This is the first year it didn't sprout before winter, so I was worried. Good. You know, garlic is one of those things, and I've talked about this before as well, that planting it too early causes it to sprout, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But when you get into that pattern where it's always sprouting, then the year it doesn't sprout can cause worry. But I try to plant my garlic so it doesn't sprout. And good point. I put my garlic in months ago. I haven't even really thought about it because I fully expect it's going to come up in spring, as it always does, because it does all of its work underground and until the springtime pops up. So Frank says, this year I'm keeping a 5-gallon bucket of water near the carrot seed, handy to keep them damp. That's a good idea. The starting carrots from seed in the garden can be challenging because you do need to keep those seeds damp, moist, and they're very close to the surface. This also holds true for planting seeds like lettuce that are just lightly sown on the top, may or may not even be covered with soil. And so having a mechanism to keep those seeds moist while they're germinating can be challenging. I'll water 4 or 5 times a day, maybe more, when I'm trying to grow my lettuce and carrots in particular, to always try to keep that soil moist where those seeds are growing. And as I've shown in earlier videos, I like to sprinkle a little bit of dried grass on top as a very light mulch to help keep those seeds as moist as possible. So that's not a bad idea at all, keeping that 5-gallon bucket ready to go. Might save you some wandering back and forth. Impatient gardener, very new to gardening for veggies, but love growing foxglove and marigolds. Marigolds remind me of my grandmother, and foxglove were my first successful perennial. Veggies, basil, so easy. Yes, completely agree. So thank you for sharing that, because I think that's an important aspect of gardening beyond just growing food and the veggies that we're going to eat, is to make your garden an opportunity to invoke all of those wonderful memories that you have. And I'm continually adding new flowers and plants and creating my own memories for the future. And hopefully my granddaughters in particular will have some of those things that in their later years, they'll be putting plants in their garden because I was growing those plants in my garden, and it's one of their happy memories. So definitely a wonderful thing to think about. When we talk about the seeds, talking about like the carrot seeds and the radish seeds and seed tape and keeping the seeds moist, when we transfer those same thoughts into our indoor setup, our grow space as I call it, and I have what I call a grow room, but not all of us have the opportunity to carve out a corner of our basement and turn it into a room for seed starting. I look at it as a seed space. And in some of my old videos, I think actually more so on my website, where I've got some blogs that are 10 and 12 years old, I have some pictures of my first real grow space. And all it was a table in a bedroom. And that's where I set up some lights and some trays and grew some plants, and from there put them out into my small garden, relatively speaking to what I have today. It was a grow space. It wasn't taking up the whole room. It was just taking up a table in a room. And so as we talk about starting seeds and what you need to think about as you start your seeds. Don't think that you have to have any fancy setup. That first table was a shop lamp or shop light, just fluorescent lights that I got at Home Depot or Lowe's. And I built just a real simple wooden frame to support the light and just put that on the table. And then I started the seeds underneath that. And it worked great. I graduated to a bigger room and fancier lights and fancier equipment. But it all comes down to the basic needs of the seed. All the seed needs is moisture, oxygen, and a little bit of heat. You don't even need to use soil. You can start your seeds on a damp paper towel. As long as that seed has that consistent moisture and the heat to tell it that it's time to wake up, it'll start growing. And the oxygen is part of that growth process. We will add a fourth component, which is a seed starter mix or a potting soil mix or some other medium that you're growing in. But that's it. That's all you need to do. And the seed doesn't care where it is. As long as it's getting those important ingredients for growth, it will grow. And so you may, in fact, if you do this, let me know in the comments. You may be able to do that in your kitchen on top of your refrigerator. I've done that many times. When I'm doing germination tests, I do that on top of my refrigerator because refrigerators generate a pretty good amount of heat. And so if you can keep your seeds moist and put them on top of your refrigerator where it's warmer than the rest of the air in that room, that can be enough to germinate and start growing those seeds. So a grow space can be the top of a refrigerator. It can be a windowsill. It can be a table in a bedroom. It can be a complete dedicated room. So we'll talk more about that. And let's get back to your question. Shanine Hammer says, one of the best things about here is listening to people from everywhere talk about what they are eating when we can't even dig in the dirt. That's a good point. And so I had some good weather these last couple days. It warmed up and the snow is melting in some areas, but not enough to even think about putting anything in the ground. So I agree with you. When I see the pictures and hear the talk of other gardens when I've still got snow on the ground, it does give me that little bit of garden enjoyment by looking at what others are doing. That's good. Okay, let's see. Yankee Sister, nice to see you here. I've devoted the back of my garage to my grow station. It's now enclosed in plastic and mylar sheets with an oil heater. There you go. Whatever space you can set aside as a grow space, go for it. And so I like that idea of using a garage and heating it. Very important aspect because the seeds need the heat. And that's your grow space. And especially for those of us who might or might not have families that can get in the way of our seed starting, if you can choose that space that is set aside, that is just your space and that others won't be interfering with, I think that's another great way to approach it. And so a heater in a garage, absolutely. I've actually thought about doing that myself, Yankee Sister. I have my greenhouse. I'm not going to be starting seeds in the greenhouse because I don't have that heat source. It just gets too cold. But that will be my primary space for hardening off and doing some seed starting in spring and early summer. So my basement grow space means that I have to carry all the trays up the stairs, out the door, to the greenhouse or to the garden. And my garage is within a few feet of my greenhouse. So I'm thinking of doing that same thing, setting up a space in my garage that I can actually heat and light and turn that into a grow space just because it's closer to the garden. It's an easier walk. And so as you think about your grow space, bring that consideration into mind. How close is it to the garden? That's one reason why so many people start seeds in greenhouses, because it's right there and you can start your seeds and pop them in the garden without too much extra effort. So as you're maybe thinking about where you want to start your seeds, I will often start seeds on my kitchen table for those that will be going out pretty quickly, so that I don't have to walk up and down all those extra stairs on a regular basis. Jay saying, Sherry Ellison, please ask Gardener Scott to turn up the gain on his mic. I have acute hearing and I'm still having trouble hearing them. So my mic control is set up as high as I can do it right now. I'll take a look at that here in just a second to see if I can turn it up. But I haven't seen anyone else mention that they're having any difficulty hearing. So maybe you might be able to turn up the volume that you have. I'll try to turn up a little bit on mine if I can. Jill says, my oldest son married, moved out, and his bedroom is now my garden room for starting seeds. I like that idea. I did that a number of years ago when my son first moved out as well. I turned part of his room into the grow room, and that table that I was telling you about was actually what became the guest room, but it was my daughter's room as well. And so, yes, if you have kids leave home, go ahead and use that space for your own benefit. I didn't turn either of those rooms into a full grow room because it was still an extra room and a guest room, but it's an opportunity for you to take advantage of it. So, okay, let's see. Looks like some others are having, I'll try to talk a little bit louder, Sherry, because everyone else seems to be hearing just fine. So Jacob says, over 200 watchers. Thank you. Yeah, we usually pick up as we start. Last week we had, I think, like 368 or something like that. So as we get going, people will be tagging along, but it's nice to have 200 of you here right now because this is just such a wonderful group to get us all together. Sunset Gazing says, I built shelving to fit a space in front of a west-facing window to hold the seed trays. It was a fun project. Now I just have to get the seeds in makeshift toilet paper plugs. So let's talk about that. That's really a good idea of how we start our seeds. And if you have a window with good light, especially if you can give it supplemental light, because depending on where you live, most of us don't have enough light yet for the seeds. Seeds really should have 12 to 16 hours of light as those little seedlings are emerging. But the toilet paper tube idea is a great idea. How are you starting your seeds? What kind of pots do you use? What kind of containers do you use? I use a bit of everything, and toilet paper tubes fall into that category. I haven't done it in a few years, but I used to do that a lot, especially showing kids how you can take a paper tube and reuse it to grow your seeds. I use a lot of yogurt cups. I'll reuse my yogurt cups. Of course, because I do so many plants, I have purchased pots of all different sizes because I do so much growing and transplanting. But when it comes to just basic seed starting, my yogurt cups are really about my favorite thing to use because I've used them over and over again. They're sturdy and they're just about the right size for some of those young seedlings. And the point here is that you don't have to spend a lot of money to start your seeds. I reuse as much as I can. You can reuse small cans. You can use those containers. One of the things that I think I showed this in a video a couple years ago, if you buy lettuce, for instance, like the leaf lettuce that's already mixed for you to make a salad, those come in those containers that have a deep pocket that is holding the lettuce, and then it has a lid on top of it. That's ideal for seed starting. You fill that container with some soil, start your seeds, and it already has the lid on it. And the reason the lid is important is because you want to try to hold the humidity around that seed. You want to keep it moist. And so if you can cover your pot or your tray or whatever you're using with a plastic bag or with another plastic container, or like the domes that I use on my trays, that will help the seed germinate. It means you won't have to water as often. And so those solid clamshells that you get at the store can be another great thing to use in starting your seeds. And it's just reusing materials that otherwise might find their way into a landfill. So as you're in your kitchen and as you're looking at all the things you have, I'll look at something and think, oh, hey, this would be great in the garden, or this would be good to start seeds. And when you kind of shift your mindset and look at things a little bit differently, you'd be surprised at a lot of the things that you can start with. Hi, Rachel. Good morning to you. Very much enjoy your videos. Thank you. Learning lots. Had a question about using straw to fill raised beds. If filling with soil on top of them, do I still need to go through the blood process, or I'm not sure if you meant blend process, or the or worrying about the straw and trying to leach out any of the herbicides that might be in it. So I'll try to cover all of that. So if you fill a bed with straw, go for it. If it does have any herbicides that might be attached to it, any of those aminopyralids, by being buried in the soil, a few things are going to happen. First, those chemicals are going to break down, but also the microbes in the soil will hasten that breakdown. And so I've seen some studies that show most of those herbicides in the soil break down more quickly than they break down in the air. So if that's a concern, you can expect that burying it is actually a pretty good thing. The straw will decompose much faster than just about anything else you would use to fill a bed. So expect that the surface of the soil is going to sink. It's going to lower probably within the same season. I have the video where I show how I fill my beds with branches and twigs, and I also use wood chips and leaves and straw. Well, the year after I filled those beds, the soil surface dropped between 3 and 5 inches as that material began to break down and decompose. And so depending on how much straw you put in, you can expect some serious drop in the level of the soil. As far as what's on top of it, have a good amended soil. And I don't worry too much about the fill at the bottom, because most of what we're growing is not going to reach that if you're doing this in a raised bed. And so depending on how tall your raised beds are, as long as the top 8 to 15 inches is soil that the plants can grow into, it really doesn't matter much about the fill that's at the bottom. It's just providing food for those microbes, for all that soil life, and it will eventually break down and throw nutrients back into the soil. So I wouldn't worry too much about the materials that you're using, as long as you've got enough soil on top that the plants will actively be growing in. And that's really the thing that you should be focusing on. Cass makes stuff. I use toilet paper tubes with open ends for things that don't like roots disturbed. Yes, really good idea. Then use one of those bulb planting tools to make a hole and drop them in without removing the tubes. Absolutely, and that's a really good idea. I do the same thing using newspaper, and you make a tube with newspaper and plant in it, and then put the whole thing in the garden, be it newspaper or toilet paper tubes. Once they get wet, saturation helps a little bit more than just moist, but they'll break down very quickly, and roots can go through that cardboard that they use on toilet paper tubes, or newspaper that might be wrapped a couple times, anything along those lines. And there are a lot of plants that don't like their roots disturbed. One of the reasons I don't do a lot of starting of squash seeds, for instance, I don't typically start my squash seeds indoors and then transplant outdoors, because they don't like to have their roots disturbed. But if you grow them in a paper tube, and I don't know if you are aware of what Cass is talking about, but a bulb planter is a tool that you just stick in the ground, twist it, pull it out, and it pulls out a big plug of soil. And then you put in whatever you're going to plant and fill around it with soil, and you're planted. So very easy, and that can be a very effective way to plant some of those things. So I like that idea. That's really good. Ultimate Gardening, nice to see you here. Getting ready to plant out my brassicas and greens, as well as direct sow root crops. I got my seeds from Survival Garden Seeds. They sent me some to try out. Awesome. And so I'm actually going to talk about this a little bit at the end of the show today, but I've got a link in the description to Ultimate Gardening's latest video that I was part of. It was a nice collaboration video with some other gardeners. So check out that Ultimate Gardening video when you get a chance. You don't have to do it right now. Stick with us live, but after the show, you can go over and check to see that video. And the thing that I'm talking about, it's basically your biggest success for the year, this last year, 2022. I've got a video coming out in a couple months that will give you the full details, but I talk about it in that video that Emmanuel has. So go ahead and take a look at that. Northchester County News. Check big box stores for their scratch and dent wood racks. Home Depot has 70% off for Trex 2x6s. May take some time to gather enough for a bed, but a lot cheaper. That's a great idea. I'm actually planning to do a video on Trex and showing how to make a garden bed using the Trex. And I'm just waiting for all the snow to melt in my trailer before I head over. But that's a real good idea. I don't shop often enough in the scratch and dent pile, and that can be a wonderful way to save money. So thank you for that suggestion. You definitely will save all of us some time and money when it comes to what we choose to use. Because I've done, it's been years, but I'll go to one of those home improvement stores with a plan, and then if I see a wood or a material that's on sale, I'll often change my plan. But I like the idea of saving some money. That's always a good idea. Two Gals is wondering, in terms of hardening off, I'm building a hoop house for a 4x8 bed, like a greenhouse. Can I move my seedlings into the hoop house when it's warm enough? What are the best practices? And so as we're starting our seeds and then allowing them to grow into seedlings, there are a couple things to look at as far as the temperature is concerned. And so most seeds really do need a warmer temperature to germinate. But once the seedling is growing, the temperature doesn't need to be that warm. So for instance, lettuce or spinach, they can germinate when the temperature is 40 degrees. They'll germinate better when the temperature is 60 or 65 degrees Fahrenheit. That's about 18 Celsius. Once they germinate and start growing, the temperature can be 40 degrees, 4.5 degrees Celsius, and the plant will continue to grow fine. And so for germination purposes, putting plastic over a bed can really improve the germination, or starting them indoors in a heated room and then moving them outdoors can really improve germination. But then when you get them outside, it depends on the plant as to how much heat they then need. And so for those cool season plants, the root crops, the lettuce, the peas, the spinach, the chard, all of those plants can handle some cold temperatures. And so I'll adjust my hoop over the plants based on the forecast for the day and the night. And so I'm hoping to have about a 50 degree Fahrenheit, 10 degrees Celsius target. And so if the day is anywhere near that, I open up the hoops and I let the air flow right through it to keep it warm. And then just before the sun goes down, I close up the hoop. That helps hold all the heat in. The night might drop down at or above freezing, but the hoop and the plastic helps hold all of that heat in. And so it's an open and close to try to moderate the temperatures. You don't want the seedlings to have extreme of of changes so that it's really, really cold at night and really, really hot during the day. And so as long as you design your hoop house that you can open it up and let some of that heat escape during the day, that's really one of the most important things to consider. And then on cloudy days, I just leave everything closed up because that sun is not going to heat it up. Around here on those cloudy days, it can get quite cold. And so look at that as a best practice, is monitoring and managing the temperature of your hoop house so that the plants aren't stressed to the point that they might not grow as well as they could. If the seedling gets relatively consistent temperature without a huge variation, it'll tend to do better. Hi Pat, nice to see you here today. Do you use soil block method for plants that don't like to be transplanted? Yes, I do. And so I've got a video, I think it's about 5 years old now, where I show how I do soil blocks. And that is one of the advantages. Soil blocks is the same as a tube. Is the plant grows in it and you just take that block and just pop it into the hole and the plant continues to grow. It can also help limit the size of the plant. And so, especially for those of us that are in Colorado, the weather and the temperatures at the time of planting may not be warm enough. And so the plant that's growing, we don't want to get too big, especially tomatoes. I've had tomato plants that are 2 feet tall by the time I put them in the ground because of those delays of cold weather that hit us here in Colorado. And so the soil block is self-pruning. When the roots start growing to the edges of that soil block, the roots can't grow in the open air, and so they stop growing. The tips die off. And what happens is the plant will actually not stop growing, but slow its growth because the tips of the roots are dying off. And so soil blocks can be really good for that as well. And in the transplanting aspect, that by the time you get them out into the garden, that block should have some really good development and you don't have to disturb it at all. You dig your hole. A bulb planter works great for this as well. And then you put that soil block in and it can be really effective. The hardest part about all of this is transporting the blocks so that they don't fall apart from the time that you start them indoors until you move them into the garden. But I'll just move the whole tray of soil blocks out to the garden and then set it right next to wherever I'm transplanting. And then I've used a number of different tools. One year I actually used a spatula to lift up the soil blocks, but I find that my hand and a garden trowel works well enough for me after having done it a number of times. But yeah, Pat, that is a great option. You might want to give it a try. And thank you for that super chat. I appreciate the contribution to the channel. Always nice to see you here. Thanks so much for that. Okay, let's see. I'm going to scroll down and try to catch up to where we are. Frank Barnwell says, if one pokes a hole in an aluminum baking pan, it's a new planting container. Absolutely. And that's, you know, I just finished a chocolate pie last night. Yes, I do like to eat pie. And I have the aluminum pie plate that the pie came in. And I was looking at it, like I said, when you start looking at things in your kitchen with that eye toward the garden, and I was thinking, how can I use this pan? Can I use it to scare the deer or the birds away? Should I use it to start seeds? And so I still haven't figured out how I'm going to use that particular pie plate, but absolutely. And the key point here, as Frank points out, is when you're starting seeds in any type of container, it should have drainage. You should poke holes or cut holes in it and then put that container into a bigger pot or pan or tray so that when the water soaks out from the seed starter container, it has some place to go. When you start your seeds or grow your seedlings and there's nowhere for that water to drain out, it can spell disaster. You can rot the roots and kill the plant in almost no time. So yeah, good point. Aluminum baking pans, especially those rectangular pans that are really easy to work in. And depending on the pan, you can take one pan, poke holes in it, fill it with soil to start your seeds, and then just put it inside of another pan. And it's that second pan that takes all the water that will drain through the first pan and start your seeds. And especially if you're reusing the aluminum pans or pie tins or whatever you've got, you haven't spent any money. You've avoided throwing things away, and a lot of those can be reused over and over and over again, which is really a great advantage. Lisa Potter, nice to see you here. Thank you so much for that super sticker. I appreciate it, and I appreciate your support. Thanks so much. Okay, let's see. Dusty Flat says, not starting tomatoes and peppers too early again, trying to break that habit of up potting. Absolutely. So make sure you look at my video this Thursday. So Thursday, I've got a video coming out. I worked on it months over last year, and I talk about tomatoes and up potting and some of those other aspects of it. I really enjoy what happened as a result of doing that experiment. So I agree with you, Dusty. It's one of those things that I'm trying to break that habit as well, and I might have something to help you out. So check out that Thursday video. Shandy's Garden says, I used flat baby tongs, forks, cardboard strips in between rows of blocks, then give it a slight tilt, take the row out all at once. It's marvelous too. And so that ties, you can actually, and I think what Shandy's Garden is talking about, so in a flat or in a rectangular aluminum container, you can put all of your soil in. And the idea behind a soil block is it's a standalone block. And usually you have space between one block and another block. But you can accomplish that same basic idea in that big tray by putting those dividers in. Strips of cardboard in between where the one block starts and the next block begins. And then when it comes time to transplant them in your garden, yeah, you've got little individual cubes with the cardboard being aside. And whether you use flat baby tongs or a spatula or a garden trowel, you can just lift it up and pop it into your garden. That's a nice tip. I like that idea. Thanks for sharing that. Okay, and Greg says, I use the baking pan method for my onion starts. And I did something similar last year with my onions as well. Onions do real well in just a big flat open container. And so, yeah, a big pan can be a great way to start your onions as well. Gary Norcal, I've started tomatoes and will up pot a dozen to bigger pots to take to my daughter-in-law. When Salt Lake City warms up, mine will go in the California ground weeks before it'll be warm enough in Utah. Absolutely. And so when we do our timing for our tomatoes, that is an aspect of what is going to happen to those tomatoes. And so if you are going to give them away, this holds true for all other plants. That actually affects when I do some of my starting as well. I will transplant my plants at different sizes. And so I like to have my peppers and tomatoes a little bit bigger, but not too big. But if I'm giving tomatoes away, I'm operating under the assumption that the person receiving those tomatoes may not be ready to put them in the ground. And so I'll actually start some of my tomatoes later so that the plant I give away is a little bit smaller, so that that person, usually my daughter for instance, will get some of my tomato plants. By the time she takes it home and gets the bed ready to go, there are days, maybe even a week or two before she gets it into the ground. So I'll give her some of my smaller plants when I'm putting out my bigger plants. If you want to give away big plants, go ahead and start them sooner. And especially if you know, I'm guessing in the case of Gary, putting plants in the ground in California is going to happen before Utah. And so there's going to be two distinct time frames of starting some of those seeds. So always important to decide when you're going to start your seeds. And don't think that you have to start all of your seeds at the same time. We're not starting tomatoes at the same time as peppers, and we're not starting peppers at the same time that we're starting our herbs, and we're not starting the herbs at the same time we're starting our spinach, and all the way across the board. Well, you don't have to start all of your tomatoes on the same day. I've got pepper starting this week, pepper seeds starting this week, and then I've got pepper seeds starting in another 2 weeks. And then I think I've got some pepper seeds starting in another 2 weeks after that. Because of where those seeds, where those plants are going to grow, I'm giving myself 2 weeks. Because the plants are going to be growing in my greenhouse, I can put plants in my greenhouse 2 to 3 weeks before I can put the plants outside. So once I've targeted the size of the plant that I like to transplant, I'll vary my seed starting to match the location that that plant is ultimately going to end up. Now, I know that's a lot of work, and you don't need to worry about all of that unless you're doing things in different places. But just to give you an idea of how I approach some of that seed starting and some of that planting. Sunset Gazing says, if you catch a store stocking shelves of glasses and mugs and such, you can usually get those boxes with the dividers and use those inserts as soil dividers. I've never done that. That's actually a really good tip. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah, and that cardboard will break down if you choose to put it in the garden or just throw it in the compost pile after you've done the transplanting. So yeah, that's actually a really good idea. I like that. Two Gal says, save your gallon milk or water jugs. They make great containers for seed starting. Yep, and so I did a video a couple years ago where I talk about the winter sowing, and you're probably seeing a lot of that around on YouTube right now, where you take a gallon jug and you put the seeds in and put it outdoors so that you're doing the winter sowing outdoors. But I like that same method for indoor sowing. I talked about using a cover over your seeds and seedlings initially to keep them moist. Well, cut a milk jug in half, put the seeds in the lower half, of course, after putting some drainage holes in the bottom, and then use the top of the milk jug as that humidity dome. And then once the seedlings are growing, you take off the humidity dome. But yeah, great way to reuse containers and take advantage of that for seed starting. So thank you. Appreciate that. Great idea. And Betty says sunset gazing. Love that idea. Always wonderful idea. And I agree with Dee. The clear plastic strawberry trays are great lettuce seed starters. And so that plays in with what I was talking about before with the clamshell design of a lot of those trays, or the light plastic lid that is easy to remove on a lot of those containers, especially the strawberry trays. Great idea if you can reuse a lot of those materials and grow your plants and cover them to keep them moist. Lots and lots of options. So Jay's wondering which starting seeds prefer a dome. Pretty much all of them. The key is that the seed should stay moist. And a lot of it depends on where you live. Of course, I live in a very dry region. My indoor humidity right now is probably about 12%. And so the top of the soil is going to dry out, and that will affect the germination. So for the seeds that are sown very close to the surface, like lettuce seeds, for instance, you almost have to have that humidity dome on top to really get good germination. For the seeds that are about 1/4 inch deep, the tomatoes and the peppers, I still use the humidity dome to keep that soil moist for germination. And that's the key. This is really only for the germination phase. If there's a seed that is deeper than that, some of the perennial plants that I've grown in the past, some of the native plants I grow, they might be sown 1/2 inch or 1 inch deep. And so I'm not as worried about the dome for those plants because even if the surface dries out a little bit, the seed is deep enough that it's in that moist soil and it should germinate fine. But just to make it easy, I use the humidity dome on everything. And then once those seedlings start emerging, and I'll leave it on for a couple days because not all seeds germinate on the exact same day. But once I see that the seedlings are actively growing, then it's time to take the humidity dome off. Because if you leave the dome in place and it stays humid, it stays moist, then you can start running into fungal problems. And so damping off disease is a fungus that attacks the stems and causes the seedlings to die. Well, after the plants are growing, you don't need to have that concern about the surface always being moist. And so take the dome off. But if you have limited space and limited domes, definitely use them over those seeds that are shallow. If you've got enough, go ahead and use them every time you start the seeds. And that's the way I approach it, Jay. So hope that helps out. It's all about the plant that's growing. It's all about that seed and giving it the best chance for success. And moisture plays into that. Isabel, thank you for that. I appreciate the contribution. Nice to have you here today as well. Always nice to see you. So thanks. It's awesome that we can have so many of our regulars here on a regular basis. Moon Dust, how moist should the soil be for beets? And so again, it's pretty much the same answer for all seeds. Evenly moist, not saturated, not sopping wet, but moist. So like if you think of a sponge and you squeeze out all of the water in the sponge and then feel the sponge, that's moist. It's not wet. A wet sponge has a different feel than a wrung out sponge. It's the same way with the soil. It's moist. It's not dry. It's not wet. It's just allowing that moisture to encase the seed, and then the seed will germinate and grow. And as those roots grow, they need oxygen as well. And so the moist soil has air in it. In all those little spaces in between the soil particles, there will be air. And so that's another big reason why moist is good, because you want air in the soil for those roots to grow. If the soil is wet, there's no oxygen. The water is now filling all of the space that the air should be. And if the soil is dry, well, of course, roots aren't going to grow in dry soil. So you need to find that happy spot for the soil. And it doesn't matter if it's a beet seed or a carrot seed or a tomato seed. All the seeds need that evenly moist environment to grow best. And so growing outside, beets are one of those plants that, and most root vegetables don't do well by starting them indoors and then moving them outdoors. Now, if you are using the toilet paper tube or one of those soil block methods where you can not disturb the roots and put the whole thing in, you can actually start root vegetables indoors. The reason for it is because of the way a lot of those root vegetables grow. They grow from a tap root, a single root that grows deep. And if that tap root breaks during the process of transplanting, then you're not going to get that root that you want to harvest. And so I don't start my carrots and my beets and my other root vegetables indoors because my season is long enough to grow them outdoors. But when I put them out in my beds, I water 3 or 4 or 5 times a day. I put that light layer of dried grass, and I do everything I can to keep that soil evenly moist. And as long as you've got a good soil, it's not going to get stopping wet, and the drainage will happen, and the lower sections of your bed will benefit from that draining water, even though the seeds are at the very top, and we want to keep that moist. We also need to keep the lower levels of our beds moist as well, because once that seed germinates and those roots start growing, the roots have to grow into that moist medium. So that's where the experience comes in, and all of us have made mistakes over the years by allowing our seeds to dry out, and it only takes one day. You're starting your seeds indoors, just one day of letting those seeds dry out can spell the difference of success or not. So when I say evenly moist, it's a consistent moisture as well, and then hopefully everything will go good. Dusty Flat says, I have to take dome off and on with celery and petunias because they are slow. Yeah, celery in particular is a really finicky plant, and I've been doing that. So I've got some tomato plants, and I've got some basil, and I've got some rosemary that are all growing in the same flat right now. And I'm doing the same thing. I'm taking the lid off and putting it back on because not everything has germinated. And so I don't want to cause too much moisture for the seedlings that have already emerged, but I still want it to be moist enough for the seeds that haven't germinated. And yeah, that's a normal part of seed starting, is dome on, dome off, depending on the condition of that soil. So if you think that you put too much water in your soil, for instance, yeah, take off the lid, and that'll help it dry out a little bit to try to reach that ideal point of moisture that the plants will benefit from. Shanine is saying, the first year I moved to my new place with a different girl room ideas and forgot to poke holes and have the whole room full of black flies. Oh, interesting. So there might be another issue for why the black flies, maybe you had some soil that had a lot of eggs in it. But I think the idea being here that if you don't poke holes in your containers, that can lead to an anaerobic environment. So the bacteria that's in all of our soil that benefits the plants is aerobic bacteria. It needs that oxygen as well. And if you don't have the holes poked, the water builds up, it gets saturated, and then the anaerobic bacteria take over. Those are the bacteria that don't need oxygen, and those are also the bacteria that smell. And so if you end up with a smelly growth space, then yeah, it's probably not a surprise that the flies are going to be attracted to that smell and overpower that room. So yet another reason to poke holes in your containers so that you don't get a smelly grow space. I've had an occasion for some bags that I left on pots that were a little bit too long or at the bottom. So like if I didn't have a container to put a pot into, especially the bigger pots for the bigger plants, I'll use a big bag, and often the plants will be shipped with a bag around the pot. Well, I've moved some of those down into my grow room and left the bag on, and then the water drains through and it pools up at the bottom and creates that smelly environment. So give it as much oxygen as you can, and that should relieve the aroma and also lessen the chance of the black flies. So always nice to see you, Mary Playford. Good morning to you as well. It's nice to see. Let's see where we are right now. We're up to 270. I told you there's always people that pop on a little bit later. So nice to see the audience growing. Let's see. Hamans is saying, I learned that I should have started my hotter peppers a week before my sweeter peppers so they stay close to the same height. Good point. And so I talked a little bit about that in the video that I did recently about my super hot peppers. And that's why I mentioned earlier that I'm starting peppers at 3 different times, because the super hot peppers are started at a different time than my hot peppers, which are started at a different time than my sweet peppers, because they do grow at different rates and they do germinate at different rates. And so that's one of those things I suggest, like Hamans is saying, this is one of those things to put in your garden journal. When you note those type of differences and how the seeds are germinating and how the plants are growing, make note of it so the next time you start your seeds, you can adjust accordingly. So sounds like you've got some experience with your pepper seeds and are making those differences. So I like to see that. That's the kind of thing that shows you can vary your plan for the best success because you figured out a better way to do it. Celsith, do Tabasco peppers count as hot peppers? Yes. And should I start them earlier than my jalapeno and bell? So jalapeno and Tabasco are in the same category. Tabasco is not as hot as, or jalapeno is not as hot as Tabasco, but I would treat them both as hot peppers. And I would do the bell peppers separately from them. So typically the hot peppers take longer to germinate, and they should be started earlier than the bell peppers. But again, if you're growing like early jalapeno, for instance, I think one of the reasons that make an early jalapeno is that they germinate faster than a lot of the other hot pepper plants. And so last year I started my early jalapeno, that's a specific variety, at the same time as my bell peppers, and they all germinated pretty much at the same time. Whereas my cayenne pepper seeds did take longer to germinate. And so the Tabasco is very, very close to a cayenne pepper as far as the heat level and how long it typically takes to germinate. Kim says, my garden's totally infested with bindweed. What should I do? Move to another house and let someone else to deal with it. Sorry for that chuckle, because bindweed is nothing to laugh at. We talked about bindweed a couple weeks ago. It's so hard to get rid of. First off, you just have to dig and dig and dig and dig and dig, and it's probably going to take years to get rid of it. If it's infested, it's going to take a long time because it spreads by the roots. Those little rhizomes underground are going to spread, and you can pull the plants, but if those little roots are left behind, another plant's going to grow from those roots. And so that's why I say dig rather than pull, because if you can dig out the roots, it really makes a difference. What I've done in areas and gardens that I had that had bindweed is to get down on my hands and knees and dig the plant out, and then follow the root and continue to dig the root and try to get as much of that plant as possible. And I've dug out bindweed with roots 3 feet long. It takes some time, but the idea is you want to try to get as many of those roots as possible so that they're not going to regrow. And you do that again next month, and you do it the month after, and you do it next year, and you do it the year after. And hopefully, eventually, you'll get rid of it. Never, ever let it flower and go to seed, because then you just have to start all over again. It has literally millions of seeds. A single bindweed plant, the seeds are so small, and it will spread everywhere. So don't let it seed. Get in there and dig up those roots, and just keep doing that over time. And eventually, you hopefully can get rid of it. I've mentioned before, when I was at the Galileo Garden, the school garden, I had 2 beds that got the bindweed, and I'm not sure where it came from. It probably blew in on the wind. The one bed I was able to get under control pretty quickly, but the other bed, the second bed, a raised bed, you would think you'd be able to control bindweed in a raised bed. I had to take a whole year off. Didn't grow any garden plants in that bed in the second year. I thought I had dug out all the bindweed, but it kept coming back. And so I didn't grow anything else but bindweed. And what I mean by that is anytime a plant broke the surface, I knew it was bindweed because nothing else was growing in that bed. And after a year with direct targeted focus in that bed, I was able to get the bindweed out. And so in a garden at large or in a landscape, just multiply that as far as how much effort it takes. And it can be tough. It really can be tough. So good luck. Just keep trying, and hopefully it'll be successful in time. Reverend Kai, I've got trumpet vine and crabgrass entrenched here. I will definitely examine the next place we live much more closely. We bought this place in the dead of winter. Yeah, we don't often talk about when to buy the house and thinking about the landscape and the plants. But yes, that can happen. I had a house like that we moved into in February. Actually, my last house we bought and moved in February. And there were things I discovered about the yard that weren't there until the snow melted and the soil warmed up. None of it was too terrible that I couldn't overcome, but it can lead to issues if you're not ready for it. So I want to point out the picture that's behind me right now. This comes from Hondo Smith, and you can actually see Hondo in the greenhouse. This is the same greenhouse that I have, just bigger. And so it's the same design, it's longer. And so thank you, first of all, Hondo, for sharing this picture with me. One of the things that adds a component, especially if you're growing in a greenhouse, that I like the way Hondo did. I've got my greenhouse resting on the ground. In fact, the base of the greenhouse is actually buried in soil, both inside and outside to have a complete seal around the greenhouse, which means the greenhouse is only as tall as the greenhouse is tall, which in my case is about 8 feet. Tall enough for everything I plan to grow. But here, and I'll move to the side, you can see that he's got 4 layers of cinder blocks as a foundation with the greenhouse on top of that. So look how tall this greenhouse is. A taller growing space, a tall greenhouse, gives you a huge opportunity to grow those taller plants. Depending on where you live, you might be able to grow trees in a greenhouse, and definitely long vining plants. So if you're thinking about getting a greenhouse, think about elevating it like he did here, with a foundation to grow the taller plants and maybe the trees or whatever it is that you have as your target for your greenhouse. So I love that idea. And I'll point off on this other side, cinder block bed as well. That's where he's got a few hundred garlic cloves planted. So basically a big space with a lot of garlic. But the greenhouse, and one reason it's such a big greenhouse, is because that's where he's growing his primary garden. That's where all of the lettuce is growing and the spinach is growing, and even tomato plants are going to be growing in the greenhouse. And if you look over his head, you can see the lights over the table because he also uses the greenhouse for starting seeds. And so I'll be using my greenhouse differently because I don't have electricity to it. And so I can't be doing all the seed starting, and I can't grow all the plants I want to grow throughout the year. But this is a 4-season garden that Hondo is using to be able to garden when some of the rest of us can't. And that's one of the big advantages to greenhouse growing. If you have that supplemental heat and that supplemental light, you can use it as your grow space to start your seeds and to grow your seedlings, and through the course of the rest of the season, everything else you're doing. Now, I also want to point out, and I've done this in recent backgrounds, all the trees. So whenever I see trees in a forested area, I have to think about the animals, particularly the deer that like to eat our garden. And so as I look at Hondo's garden, I see the low bed off to the side that's got all the garlic in it, which the deer typically aren't going to eat. But inside the greenhouse is where the garden is. And you're not going to have the deer, and you're not going to have those animal pests getting in the greenhouse in most cases. So that is another option. If you're in an area with a lot of animal pests, a greenhouse may be the solution for your garden growing. So appreciate the picture, Hondo, and it does look great. That's a beautiful greenhouse. I love mine, and that looks to be probably 4 times the size of mine, which is a lot of space. So good luck with your garden, and thank you for sharing. And then, of course, all the wood chip mulch around in the pathways so you don't have to deal with the weeds. Great ideas. So hopefully we got you thinking about maybe the possibility of growing in a greenhouse, or at least how you can approach different ways of growing if a greenhouse is at all on your plan. And as I mentioned in some of the videos I did last year, I wanted a greenhouse for a long time. It took pretty much 20 years of planning and saving to get to the point to have a greenhouse. So those of us that are or were envious of the others, don't be envious, because most of us have taken a long time to get to the point that we're actually growing in a greenhouse. So just something to think about. Liz Oppenhuis, let's say it that way. Thank you for that super sticker. I appreciate that and appreciate your support. Nice to have you here today, and always nice to see that contribution. I do appreciate it. So Llama says, very cool, massive garden in the making. Great fence too. Yeah, absolutely. And so you can see the, I think that's probably the guideline around the top. That might actually be electrified. I'm not sure. But yeah, that is a great fence. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for Hondo to grow a lot of other things in the future as well. So let's see, I'm going to try to catch up now and scroll down, see what I may have missed. What's in the Garden says, I have bindweed too. I'm going the no dig method, except dig the bindweed. It's a long process, but I'm making progress. Good for you. Yeah, it's one of those things. You can pull bindweed, but you're not going to kill bindweed by pulling it. Rid of it. Yes, even in a no dig garden, you've got to dig the bindweed if you really want to try to be done with it. Jen Van Brunt, we adopted 2 bigger and younger dogs in September. They get their noses into everything. I've had to move my grow space from the kitchen to a room behind the door. And that's actually a real good thing to consider. Mala is great in my grow room. She'll often, you can see her in a lot of the videos that I shoot. If you look in the background, you can often see her walking by or lying on the ground behind where I'm making my videos. But she discovered outside that the pots, those black plastic pots, are a lot of fun to play with. And so I've had to adjust how I store some of my pots in my grow space, because Mala thinks it's a toy to take any pots that I have lying on the ground and start chewing on them and play with them. And then she also has a lot of other things she likes to nose at and dig. And I don't have any right now, but I usually have blood meal and bone meal in my grow space area as well, which is ideal for dogs to nose and try to find out what's inside. So a lot of fertilizers are also enticing for the animals. And so as you put together or build out your growth space, if you've got dogs, yeah, they're going to find it. And cats too. I don't have cats, but I have no doubt that the cats would jump up and discover the blood meal if I was storing it in my grow space. So be aware of those kind of things. And yeah, moving it from one spot to another may be necessary depending on how nosy, literally, the animals might be. Yankee Sister, oh, it's so nice to see you. Thank you for that. Felt weird missing the lives, but so glad to be here today. Blessing Gardner Scott, mods, and chat. And blessings back to you, Yankee Sister. We have missed you. Always miss you when you're not here. So always nice to have you back. And thank you for that super chat. Of course, Mondays, and I've said this before, Mondays are just special when I have a chance to be with you and share the time with you. And especially for those of you like Yankee Sister Homestead who have been here for so long and come back every week. It's part of the day. It's part of what we're doing. I'm actually going to be doing some traveling this weekend to see my son, and I planned my travels to travel on Sunday so that I can be back to do the Monday live stream. And didn't even think that Super Bowl Sunday is coming up. I should be back before the game starts, but that's not a big deal. It's actually more important that I'm home before Monday so that we can spend this time together. So it definitely means a lot to me as well. This is how I start my gardening week. This gives me that charge to my garden battery to be able to go out and get all the stuff done that needs to be done. So glad we are here together and having a chance to talk about it. So TJ the Hawk's wondering, what are your gardening goals this year? So good question. I did the video on gardening goals a couple weeks ago, and I talked a little bit about some of my gardening goals in that video. But this year, my goal actually is to focus. And I'll be talking about this in a video coming up in a couple weeks. I am not growing a whole bunch of plants that I normally grow. I'm not growing yellow squash this year. I'm not growing melons this year. There are a lot of plants I'm not growing this year because my goal is to focus on a few types of plants. Peppers. I've been saying this for months. I'm going to be growing a lot of peppers this year. I'm growing different varieties in different ways in different places. And so one of my goals this year is just to do that, to choose those very specific varieties of very specific plants and have a focus and make this an educational year and not so much a food producing year. Now, not all of us have that opportunity, but I encourage that you do something similar, even if it's in a single bed. Take the space and time to learn more about specific plants so that in the future, when you want to be doing the production of food or whatever the reason is for your garden, you've learned some of these lessons along the way. And so for me, huge gardening goal this year is to learn more. And that may sound surprising to you, but I want to learn more. Yes, I already know a lot, but I already know that there's a lot I don't know. So I want to grow more peppers this year. I want to really focus on the tomatoes as well. So Eli was on the live stream a couple weeks ago, and she and I are doing this comparison of the tomato growing. Well, I'm going to try to grow my tomatoes like she does. And I've never done that before. I've never grown the tomatoes in the containers in a greenhouse like she does. So that's all part of a garden goal this year. That education of taking specific plants, growing them in different ways, and then seeing what happens. And of course, I hope for success. But when you make this kind of effort, it's not about the success. It's about the education. It's about the learning, the experimentation, the learning of what it is you're doing. And when you focus and you can point out the variables to yourself that make a difference, then you've had a successful season. So you'll see videos on this, of course, but by the end of the season, I'm not going to be weighing my plants this year, and I'll still have the plants that grow so I can preserve them and make my pickles and all of those favorite things that I like to do, but I'm going to be doing more plants and less plants. More plants of what I really want and fewer plants of the ones that I really don't need to grow this year. So that may surprise you as far as what a gardening goal is, because we're often talking about we want to grow more food, we want to do bigger building, we want to do lots of the other things. And last year, that was one of my big goals, was building out and adding more beds, and I did that. And this year, it's more about learning and the education piece. And so hopefully I'll have a lot of that to share with you. Jordan Marie Organics, thank you for that super chat. Will you be doing more cooking, recipe preserving videos this year as well? Absolutely, absolutely. And so I've got the video on the pepper sauce, for instance. It's done, it's made. I'm just waiting a few months to release it because no one's making pepper sauce right now. So I'm going to wait till people start growing peppers to show a video on how to make pepper sauce. But I've already got that video done. I've got some freeze-dried videos that I'm working on that'll probably come out here pretty soon. I'm planning on doing some more fermenting videos over the course of the year, where I'll do some videos to show you things that I'm already doing, but I may not have made a video about. And then I'm also planning, and this gets back to one of the garden goals this year. One of my goals is to grow paste tomatoes in abundance, a whole bunch of paste tomatoes. I actually have 3 varieties of seeds that I already have. And so I'm planning on making a lot of tomato sauce and tomato paste that will be frozen and freeze dried and canned, and I'll be showing all of that. And so, yes, even though I'm targeting fewer types of plants this year, I'm actually not only experimenting with how to grow them, but I'll be showing you a lot of different ways to preserve those types of plants. So thank you for asking that question, because the recipes, I'll have some recipes coming out, but usually the recipe is tied into one of those preserving videos, and I may expand to have more just purely recipe videos. But definitely, thank you for asking that question, and thank you for that super chat, because those videos are definitely coming, and they were pretty well received. You probably don't know, and the reason I say that, so let's see, we've got we're up to about 255 people on the stream right now. I have some videos where I have recipes. I have a recipe on how to make pumpkin pie, and I have a recipe on making zucchini bread, and not many people have seen those videos. I think until recently, one of those videos had about 255 views. And so I don't do a lot of recipe videos because on my channel, people just don't watch the recipe videos. But I do like making them. And if I do come across something like with the shishito pepper video a while back, I will have a video about it. But nobody watches them. And it's not that I feel like I'm wasting my time, but I'd rather take my time to do a video that more people are interested in than to do a video that no one will watch. So if you want to see some of my recipe videos, go back in the archives and you can see some of those that I've done in the past that nobody watched, but I still think are good recipes to use. Liz and the Mixing Bowl Homestead, thank you for being here today. I've learned so much from you. Just want to say thank you, and I appreciate all you do. Well, thank you so much for that, Liz. I thank you for that super chat, and I thank you for those words, and I thank you for being here. And I haven't seen you comment before, so I'm not sure if that's the first comment you've done, but so nice of you to show and share your words. And hope to see you back and involved in the comments in the future. The ladies' garden and home, nice to see you as well. Thank you for that super chat. Just want to say thank you for sharing all your gardening wisdom. You've saved me from many mistakes and really helped me improve as a gardener. Well, thank you for that as well. That is really the reason I do this. A couple years ago, I started a series of videos during the growing season, and that was in my introduction where I said that I want to make you a better gardener. And that really is the overall goal for my channel. And that's why I'm looking at videos ahead, all with the intent of showing you everybody those ways to help all of us become better gardeners. Because believe it or not, and I encourage small gardening channels to make videos and to learn more and to keep producing. And all of you, even if you don't think of yourself as a channel where you can teach someone, I encourage you to make videos, because the process of making a video where you show your garden and you share your experience helps you become a better gardener. So every video I make makes me a better gardener. And so it's a two-way street. I appreciate your kind words, and this is why I'm making videos. But believe me, I have become a much better gardener since I started making videos than I was beforehand. And that's why I encourage all of you to start documenting what you're doing. And when you put what you're doing to words, it really helps you evaluate for yourself what you're saying. And it makes you think about the process. And that's one of the ways that it really helps you become a better gardener overall. And when I'm making videos and I do the research and I figure out what I'm going to say and what I'm going to show, it's easy to say that I learn something about gardening from my own videos every time I make a video. Because as I'm picking out the information to share with you, sometimes I highlight a piece of information that I'd forgotten about or that at the time I didn't think was as important. But in making a video, I suddenly recognize the importance of that particular aspect. So yes, I'm so glad that I could help improve you as a gardener, but you all, of course, have helped improve me as a gardener as well. And so that's ultimately, I think, the journey is striving on the path to that point of improvement. Our gardens are never going to be perfect. Our gardens may not always be successful, but we can always have that improvement as we do our journey in our garden. And that's I think the easiest approach, so that if you have a success, it's wonderful. If you have a failure, it's an opportunity to learn, but it's all about trying to improve and be better than you were yesterday and the month before and the year before. And I'm looking ahead to 3 and 5 and 10 years from now and just imagining how improved my gardening will be in that time. And so it's all relative. I know so many people look at my videos and so many people look at me as an expert. It's just because I approach it a little bit differently and I make videos about it and I learn from what I'm doing. And you could do the same thing. So I encourage you all definitely to take that kind of approach. Bernice, hello to you. I live in Colorado Springs and I use you as my gardener go-to person. Well, thank you. You let me know when to cover the garden, when it's hailing or temperatures are going to drop. Love you. Thank you so much for that, Bernice. And for those of you that don't know, I'm in Colorado Springs too. This is an extremely challenging environment. So I'm glad I can help out a local as well, because it this is such a tough region. Celsith, my first garden last year was a glorious mess with flowers planted in amongst the veg. I loved it. Not a fan of manicured gardens. I love it too. I always suggest that variety and diversity, and I love the idea of having flowers interspersed with the rest of your garden. That's a great idea, and all of us should be doing that. So good for you. And yes, manicured gardens are great. I love going to manicured botanic gardens and seeing the designs. That is wonderful. But when it comes to a home garden, that doesn't need to be manicured. And mine is far from looking pretty, and I'm okay with that, because I'm letting the weeds grow and I'm letting the grasses grow and I'm letting the flowers grow. And oh, by the way, there's some vegetables in there as well. So good for you, Celsith, and keep it up, because that is one of those things. And Francis says the same thing. I'm with Celsith. It's the diversity. It's the number of plants. It's putting it all together, and it is one of those things to benefit your plants. Nature isn't a single crop. It's not monocultured. So I like working with nature and having a lot of extra stuff around, and especially when that extra stuff is plants. What more could you ask for? So Jay is saying, last year I installed trellis with both veggie and flowers, and people use them for photo backdrops. That's a great idea. Yeah, I love doing that. I don't do it as often as I wish I did, but when if you see the video, I did a video probably 6 years ago now, my tomato trellis video, at least 5 years ago. And in that video, I show that I'm growing nasturtiums in the same bed as my tomatoes. And as the tomatoes grow up that trellis, that's what the video was about, but the nasturtiums grow up the trellis at the same time along with the tomatoes. So great idea, Jay. And that is one of those things for all of us. If you're growing a plant on a trellis, yeah, get a flower that's also a vining plant to grow right next to it up the trellis. I don't know that anyone's ever used mine as a photo drop, but kudos to you, Jay, that you could do something that others wanted to to photograph. So that's fantastic. I'm a bit envious of that. That's fantastic. So Dusty Flats is saying, it's been enjoyable to find your channel. Thank you. It's been opened up. It has opened up my view of trying different varieties and ways of doing things and sharing with others. You do a great job answering questions. Well, thank you for that, Dusty Flats. I do appreciate it. And let's see, I saw another comment that I wanted to highlight here as we move to the end part. Yeah, Rob's allotment garden. I love it when bigger channels help to promote us smaller channels. And I love doing it too. And that's what I wanted to end with today. So I mentioned Ultimate Gardening had a video, and I put it in the description below. And it's one of those things that the bigger channels really aren't any different than the smaller channels as far as us, the gardeners, the people that are doing the channels. Sure, some of our videos might be better, but most of the time it's just that we've been doing a whole bunch of videos. I've been doing these live streams for over 2 years now. I have over 400 videos, and that has helped me become a bigger channel. But I had the opportunity to be on a Zoom call a couple months ago with James Prigioni, who has one of the biggest channels. Everybody loves James Prigioni's channel, and he's a great guy. He's just a regular guy, and you can just get together and talk gardening with somebody like that. Kevin from Epic Gardening, the world's biggest gardening channel, is just a regular guy. And Kevin and I have chatted a little bit in our comments back and forth in recent weeks. I think we all have that opportunity to become big channels if we put the time into it, if we put the effort into it. And I think it's great to support the smaller channels who are on the journey that I was on many, many years ago. You know, I talk about a video from 7 years ago. That just gives you an idea of how long I've been doing this. And so that's why I wanted to, highlight Rob's comment here, and also highlight Emmanuel from Ultimate Gardening, who asked me to be part of a collab video with a few others. And he's just a kid. And that's literal and figurative. Anybody younger than about 50 years old, I call a kid. But Emmanuel is a kid who's interested in gardening, and he has a pretty good gardening channel. And he's coming up with some good ideas for videos, and I was more than glad to help out and maybe help that video get a few more views and maybe a few more subscribers than he's used to. And it wasn't just me, it was also the others that were helping him out in that video. And so the reason I wanted to bring this up, and we've kind of talked about it in a few different ways over the weeks and even today, but it's the idea that all of us can help other gardeners out. There are so many times, I can't even count the number of times that I've had a gardener ask me a question, and then they make some comment along the lines of, well, I would do this thing, but I just don't know enough. Or I would like to do this other thing, but I just don't know how. And I usually take that as an opportunity to ask them some questions about what they do know. And all of us, even if you're a brand new gardener, all of us know more than we did yesterday. And in almost all cases, we as gardeners know way more about gardening plants than people who haven't grown plants. So even the beginning gardener who has just put in their first seed already knows about more about gardening than most people know. And so use it as an opportunity to share your knowledge with others. Somebody at some point shared the idea of gardening with Emmanuel, and he started a YouTube channel, and he started making videos, and now he's rubbing elbows with Gardener Scott in making videos. All of us can do that. All of us have the opportunity to share with others the idea for gardening, but then also to help guide those people on that journey toward the education piece. It's never always successful, especially when you live in Colorado. It's not a journey towards gardening success necessarily. I really do believe it's just the journey that takes place in the garden. And how you decide to approach that, it's always better with somebody else to be part of that journey. So, what are you going to do today, tomorrow, this season, over the course of your gardening year? What are you going to do to help somebody out, to help help that child, to help that person that wants to try something in gardening but doesn't think they know enough? You might be the one to make the difference because you do know enough. Even if it's just a little bit more, that can be enough to help that person continue on their journey and maybe even have some of that success to try again and try again and try again as you continue the journey. So I just wanted to share that with you today, and I encourage that you check out the video for Ultimate Gardening, but also check out all the other channels out there. Rob's Allotment Gardening. Next week, I'm going to have a guest on the show that will also talk about it, a smaller channel, but with some great information. And I've already got some others that are programmed. I've got another one 2 weeks after that with another guest on the show. So come back. I'll be highlighting some of the channels on YouTube that you might not be familiar with. But by all means, if you discover somebody new, support them, because they may be at the beginning of their gardening journey and using videos as a way to learn more, not just trying to share with you what they're doing, but using it as a chance for them to make their gardening journey better, more enjoyable, and to become a better gardener overall. So just want to share that with you today. I do enjoy helping out the smaller channels. I still think of myself as a small channel when I look at James Prigioni and Epic Gardening and a lot of the others. And when we chat, I realize it's purely a number on YouTube. We're all the same when it comes to how we approach gardening. Hope you take that with you as you start this gardening week. I hope it's a great week. I hope if you're in a cold area, the weather is getting warmer. And if you're starting your seeds, I hope that you have great success as those seeds germinate and begin growing. And I'll definitely be back here next week. Keep your fingers crossed that my flight goes well on Sunday. And we'll have a guest. We'll talk gardening. And we'll keep moving on our journey. I'm Gardener Scott. Enjoy gardening.